A German reconnaissance pilot sweeps low over the English coast. Through his camera viewfinder, he sees exactly what he expected and exactly what the Allies wanted him to see. Hundreds of tanks lined up in fields, landing craft packed into harbors, fuel depots, artillery pieces, military trucks, and the unmistakable silhouette of a massive command infrastructure. Most importantly, the insignia of the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, commanded by the most feared American general in Nazi Germany's strategic assessment, General George S. Patton. The pilot pulls back, satisfied. He has confirmed what German intelligence already believed. The real Allied invasion of Europe would come at Pas-de-Calais. Hitler would be ready. He had no idea he'd just photographed a lie. The tanks were rubber. The landing craft were built from scaffolding and canvas. The fuel depots were inflatable. The entire 1st United States Army Group, supposedly 150,000 soldiers with massive armored and air support, did not exist. This is the true story of Operation Quicksilver, the Ghost Army, and the system of lies that convinced Adolf Hitler to hold his most powerful armored reserves in place, while the real Allied invasion hit the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. The deception didn't just work. It worked so well that historians argue it shortened the entire war by months, possibly years. Here's how they pulled it off. To understand why the Allies needed a ghost army, you need to understand what they were up against. By 1944, Nazi Germany had turned the French coastline into a wall. Hitler called it the Atlantic Wall, over 2,600 kilometers of fortifications from Norway to the Spanish border, more than 15,000 concrete bunkers, artillery that could hit ships miles offshore, minefields in the water, on the beaches, everywhere. The Allies had already seen what happened when that wall held. In August 1942, nearly 6,000 troops, mostly Canadian, landed at Dieppe in what they called a raid. Within 10 hours, over 3,600 of those men were dead, wounded, or captured. The German defenders barely broke a sweat. That lesson stuck. You cannot land troops on a fortified beach unless the defenders are undermanned, poorly positioned, or looking somewhere else entirely. By 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel commanded the German forces in France. Hitler had appointed him Inspector General of Western Defenses in late 1943 and commander of Army Group B in January 1944, specifically to shore up the Atlantic Wall before the Allied invasion everyone knew was coming. He had approximately 58 divisions across Western Europe, including some of the most powerful armored units in the Wehrmacht, the SS Panzer divisions, held in reserve, capable of destroying any beachhead before it had a chance to consolidate. But there was a problem inside the German command structure. Rommel believed the Panzer reserves needed to be positioned right behind the beaches, ready to counterattack within hours of any landing. His superior, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, believed the reserves should be held further back, held for a massive, decisive counter-offensive once the Allies had committed their main force. The two men disagreed completely on where the armor should be. Hitler split the difference, which satisfied neither man, and produced a compromise that would prove catastrophic. The Panzer reserves were held in place, but couldn't be moved without Hitler's personal authorization. The Allies chose Normandy as their landing point. The beaches were manageable. The terrain worked. But the math was brutal. Even if the initial landing succeeded, German armored reserves could arrive from Pas-de-Calais and overwhelm the beachhead within days. There was only one solution. The reserves had to be frozen in place. And the only way to freeze them was to make them believe Normandy wasn't the real invasion, just a feint designed to pull them out of position before the real blow fell at Pas-de-Calais. To sell that lie, the Allies needed something for the Germans to believe in. A massive, credible army pointed directly at the coast they were most worried about. So they built one. Out of nothing. The unit that built the Ghost Army was called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. About 1,100 men. Their standard American infantry division ran to about 15,000, which means this group was expected to impersonate formations 30 times their own size and make it convincing. They recruited from art schools, advertising agencies, and film studios. Because what they needed wasn't soldiers who could fight. They needed soldiers who understood illusion. They had 4 tools. Visual deception. Inflatable tanks. Rubber Sherman tanks that inflated with a small pump, cast realistic shadows and silhouettes from altitude, and could be deflated and packed into a duffel bag in 20 minutes. Same technology made inflatable artillery, trucks, half-tracks, landing craft. From 1,000 feet, through a camera lens, essentially indistinguishable from the real thing. And they were engineered specifically to beat German photo analysts. Real tanks leave track marks in the soil. The 23rd dragged wire mesh behind jeeps to fake those marks. A tank whose turret always points the same direction across multiple photo sorties is suspicious, so the inflatable turrets rotated. Sonic deception. Sound trucks playing recordings of tank columns, bridge building operations, artillery batteries, made using real equipment, mixed by engineers who understood acoustic physics. Played at volumes calculated for the distances German listening posts were known to operate from. An acoustic portrait of an army that wasn't there. Radio deception. Every radio operator has a fist, the unique rhythm and pressure of how they tap their Morse code, like a fingerprint. German signals analysts knew how to identify individual operators. The 23rd trained operators to replicate those signatures from other units, spending weeks mastering the handwriting of a phantom army on every frequency that mattered. Human deception. Soldiers deployed into towns wearing the patches of units stationed hundreds of miles away, talking to locals, letting the wrong information reach German intelligence the way it always does, through the inevitable human leaks that come with any large military presence. Among the men who did this work, future fashion designer Bill Blass, abstract painter Ellsworth Kelly, and wildlife artist Arthur Singer. Their civilian skills, understanding how an audience perceives and interprets visual information, how to make something look real when it isn't, translated directly into the business of manufacturing military reality. What made the system dangerous was how all 4 tools worked together. A single fake piece of evidence is easy to dismiss. But aerial photographs showing equipment, combined with radio signals confirming troop movements, combined with human sources reporting on unit composition, combined with a trusted agent confirming everything, that builds something almost impossible to challenge. The more sources agree, the more confident an analyst becomes, even if every one of those sources is being controlled by the same opponent. The Germans didn't believe in FUSAG because rubber tanks fooled them. They believed in FUSAG because rubber tanks and radio signals and human intelligence and a Spanish conman all told the same story from different directions simultaneously. But the physical deception was only one layer. The deeper layer, the one almost nobody knows about, was being run by a single Spanish conman operating out of London. His name was Juan Pujol Garcia. The Germans knew him as Arabelle. British intelligence knew him as Garbo. Before the British ever recruited him, Pujol had approached the Germans on his own, invented a fictional network of agents he claimed to be running across Britain, and been feeding fabricated intelligence reports to the Abwehr, all while sitting in Lisbon, having never set foot in England. When British intelligence found out what he was doing, they were horrified and fascinated in equal measure. They recruited him immediately and moved him to London. By 1944, Garbo had built up such credibility with German intelligence that they considered him their most reliable source in Britain. He was awarded the Iron Cross by the Germans, and, after the war, the MBE by the British. He may be the only person in history to receive high honours from both sides of the same conflict. His network of fictional subagents confirmed the existence of FUSAG. They reported on Patton's movements. They described the massive build-up of forces in southeast England aimed at Pas-de-Calais. And they fed all of this into German intelligence simultaneously with the aerial photographs, the radio intercepts, and the human intelligence coming in from other sources, all saying the same thing. This is the key to making a deception work at scale. A single fake piece of evidence can be dismissed. Evidence that arrives from aerial photography, signals intelligence, human agents, and trusted informants simultaneously, all pointing to the same conclusion. That's nearly impossible to dismiss. The Germans weren't fooled by rubber tanks. They were fooled by rubber tanks plus radio signals plus Garbo, plus a completely fabricated organizational history, all confirming each other from different directions. On top of all that, George Patton himself. The Germans feared and respected Patton more than any other American general. Placing him in nominal command of FUSAG added a layer of credibility that no amount of inflatable equipment could manufacture. If Patton was there, something real was being planned. And then June 6th arrived. At 12:16 a.m. on June 6, 1944, Allied paratroopers began dropping into Normandy. Within hours, the largest amphibious invasion in military history was underway across 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The Germans knew something was happening. They didn't know if it was the real thing. This was the most dangerous moment. If the German command committed its armored reserves immediately, the beachhead could be crushed before it consolidated. The 1st SS Panzer Corps sat in reserve close enough to intervene decisively, if someone gave the order. But Hitler hesitated. Part of that hesitation was structural. Hitler had ordered that Panzer reserves couldn't move without his personal authorization. On the morning of June 6th, he was asleep. His staff was afraid to wake him. By the time he was up and the request reached him, he refused, because the intelligence picture he'd been given told him Normandy was a feint. Part of it was the intelligence itself. Garbo's network was still reporting massive forces in southeast England. Signal intercepts showed communications traffic consistent with a huge formation preparing to move. Aerial photographs still showed all that equipment near Dover. Everything pointed to Pas-de-Calais. Rommel wasn't even in France. He'd calculated, based on weather data, that no invasion was possible in early June, and had gone to Germany for his wife's birthday. By the time he was racing back, the landings were already hours old. The German 21st Panzer Division, near Caen, launched the only armored counterattack available that day. It was stopped. The beachhead held. The SS Panzer divisions, the ones that could actually have overwhelmed the landings, stayed where they were, waiting for the real invasion. Then, just 3 days later, D+3, the deception delivered its masterstroke. By June 9, 1944, it was getting harder for the Germans to maintain the fiction that Normandy was a feint. Too many troops had landed. Too much equipment was ashore. German field commanders were screaming for the Panzer reserves. The window for destroying the beachhead was closing fast. On June 9th, Garbo transmitted one of the most consequential intelligence messages in modern history. He told his German handlers he had assembled intelligence from his network and could offer his definitive assessment. The Normandy landings were exactly what Allied command wanted German intelligence to believe: the main effort. But Garbo claimed to have seen through it. His sources confirmed FUSAG under Patton remained intact in southeast England, fully assembled, ready to strike. Normandy was the setup. Pas-de-Calais was the kill shot. The message was so consistent with everything German intelligence had built over months that it was taken seriously at the highest levels. It was transmitted directly to Hitler. Hitler's response was immediate. He ordered the SS Panzer divisions that had been authorized to move toward Normandy to return to their positions. They were to hold and wait for the Pas-de-Calais invasion. Those units didn't arrive in Normandy in force for weeks. By the time German High Command finally accepted that no second invasion was coming and committed their reserves fully, the Allied beachhead was secure. Hundreds of thousands of men and enormous quantities of equipment had landed. The Normandy campaign had passed the point where it could have been defeated. Garbo's post-invasion message is documented in captured German records. It directly influenced the decision to hold the armored reserves in place. The historians who've studied the operational situation in the most detail are consistent on this point. Those reserves, arriving on June 7th or 8th in full strength, could have driven the Allied forces back into the sea. A message from a man who didn't exist, sent on behalf of agents who didn't exist, persuaded the command of one of history's most powerful military forces to hold its most dangerous weapons in place while the war slipped out of its reach. If you've never heard of Juan Pujol Garcia before this video, drop that in the comments, because what comes next is the part the history books almost never cover. While the intelligence war was playing out at the highest levels, the 100 men of the 23rd, were doing something stranger, living inside the deception and maintaining it in real time, from the ground. Running a fake army takes constant work. The inflatable tanks had to be positioned according to actual military doctrine. Right spacing, right dispersal patterns, right relationship to roads and terrain. A rubber tank in the wrong position is worse than no tank at all. German photo analysts were trained and experienced. One mistake and the whole picture unravels. The sonic trucks had to be operated precisely. If German intelligence believed a tank column was moving down a specific road at a specific time, the recordings of tank treads had to come from that direction, at the right volume, and stop when the column would have reached its destination. Radio operators had to maintain traffic patterns matching the formations they were impersonating. The right frequency of transmissions, the right types of messages, the right timing. And they had to do this in the voice of specific operators, replicating individual fists they'd spent weeks studying. And then there was the human layer. Soldiers walking into French and Belgian towns wearing the wrong patches, maintaining cover in bars and cafes, letting the right rumors reach the wrong ears. This was not a desk job. The 23rd suffered casualties, artillery fire, air attack. They operated close to the front with less protection than conventional units, and they couldn't talk about any of it, not to their families, not to anyone outside the unit. Not until the records were declassified in 1996, 50 years of silence. The secrecy was so complete that most of the men who served in the 23rd couldn't even compare notes with each other about what they'd done until decades after the war ended. They'd carried the same secret independently, in isolation, for most of their adult lives. They helped win the war and went home with nothing to show for it. Understanding why this worked requires understanding how German intelligence failed. And the failure is not what you'd expect. The Germans weren't stupid. Their analysts were trained. Their systems were rigorous. Their assessment of Allied intentions was logical given the information they had. Pas de Calais made sense. It was the shortest crossing point, closest to Germany's industrial heartland, best port infrastructure. If German command had been planning the invasion from the Allied side, they'd have chosen Pas de Calais too. That's the key. The most effective deceptions don't require the enemy to believe something irrational. They just need to give the enemy better evidence for what they already believe. The Allies didn't create the German expectation. They found it already there and loaded it with supporting evidence from every direction. German intelligence also had a structural problem. It was fragmented and politically toxic. The Abwehr and the SS intelligence arm were competing with each other. Both operated in an environment where contradicting Hitler's existing beliefs could end a career. That created systematic pressure toward confirming what leadership already believed, rather than challenging it with uncomfortable evidence. When Garbo's message arrived saying Normandy was a feint, it landed on ground that was already fertilized. Accepting it was easy. Rejecting it would have required someone to stand up and argue that their most trusted agent was wrong, that their aerial photographs showed fake equipment, that their signals intelligence was manufactured, all simultaneously. Nobody in the German command structure was positioned to make that case or willing to take the career risk. There's one more factor that doesn't get enough attention. Rommel. Of all the German commanders, he was the one aggressive and experienced enough to have potentially pushed through the hesitation and committed the reserves on June 6th, regardless of Hitler's caution. He was also the one who wasn't there. He'd based his decision to leave on a weather forecast that was correct by the models of the time. History turned in part on a birthday trip and a meteorologist. The fall of Fusag and the success of Quicksilver didn't end the 23rd's work. They ran deception operations through the entire European campaign, more than 20 separate missions from Normandy to Germany. After the breakout from the beaches and the drive across France, the 23rd was used to plug gaps in the Allied line, creating the appearance of larger forces in areas where American units were stretched thin, forcing German commanders to be cautious about sectors they might otherwise have exploited. Their last and biggest operation came in March 1945. The U.S. Ninth Army, under Lieutenant General William H. Simpson needed to cross the Rhine River. the last major natural barrier before Germany's interior. The 23rd was sent to a decoy crossing site and deployed their full toolkit. Over 600 inflatable tanks and artillery pieces left purposely imperfectly camouflaged, sonic trucks running round the clock, fake radio networks filling the airwaves. They even set off flash canisters to simulate artillery fire, which drew actual German counter-battery fire onto their inflatable decoys. The real crossing happened at a different location. The Germans concentrated at the wrong point. The Ninth Army crossed with significantly lighter opposition than expected. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the unit was disbanded, records classified. Men dispersed back to civilian life. Bill Blass went back to fashion. Ellsworth Kelly went back to painting. Arthur Singer went back to illustrating birds. Most of them told almost no one. The men who helped save the D-Day invasion were never allowed to say so. The PBS documentary, The Ghost Army, produced by Rick Beyer, brought their story to a wide audience in 2013. A Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor Congress can give, was signed into law in February 2022, 78 years after D-Day. If this is the first time you're hearing about the Ghost Army, subscribe. What we cover next on Warblind goes even deeper into the operations that didn't make the history books. On June 6, 1944, 156,000 Allied troops crossed the English Channel and landed on 5 beaches in Normandy. 414 of them were confirmed dead by the end of the day. Total Allied casualties across all 5 beaches, killed, wounded, missing, are estimated between 10,000 and 12,000. Those numbers are staggering, but the counterfactual is starker. The SS Panzer divisions held in place by the deception numbered in the tens of thousands of men, with some of the most powerful tanks in the world. Their timely arrival at Normandy would not merely have increased Allied casualties. In the assessment of most historians who've studied the operational situation, it would have destroyed the beachhead entirely, driven 156,000 men back into the sea at catastrophic cost, and potentially delayed the end of the war by years. The men who died on those beaches paid a terrible price. The deception that kept the German reserves frozen in place meant those sacrifices were not made for nothing. The Ghost Army never fired a shot in the operation that mattered most. They inflated rubber tanks, played recordings of engines, tapped out fake radio messages, wore the wrong patches in the wrong bars, and they may have saved the entire invasion. The full story of what they did was classified for decades. The men who survived it carried it in silence. Some of them lived long enough to see the declassification, the documentary, the medal ceremony. Most of them were old by then. Some were gone. 78 years passed between D-Day and the Congressional Gold Medal. That's a long time to carry a secret that helped change the course of history. They built a lie so convincing it changed the world. And then they had to pretend they'd never built it at all. That's what the Ghost Army was. That's what it means to wage war with paint and sound and misdirection instead of steel. And it worked. If this changed the way you think about how wars are actually won, consider what else happened in the shadows of World War II that official history barely mentions. The next episode of Warblind goes somewhere most military history channels never touch. You won't want to miss it.